Namaste. When we read Sri Aurobindo, especially works like The Life Divine, it appears that he is taking us from one mountain peak to another. And sometimes, but he's carrying us actually, not just taking us, he's carrying us. But when you are carried by such a wonderful master in his arms, you may tend to miss out something on the way. So we will see that in each chapter he slightly returns back to the point. It's like at times a bit of back and forth so that we don't miss any detail. All the entire scenery of the Himalaya he wants us to understand, because to understand anything in creation we have to understand the whole, or rather more than the whole. That's why the Vedas, the Upanishads say that only by knowing the all, the one who is the all, can anything be known. Without that, we cannot know anything. So he is ensuring that we know that one, and on that basis, every little detail we understand. So he takes us to this. We often believe we know. He has already revealed to us what is true knowledge. Knowledge of oneness, what is a knowledge which is by division. So how does this knowledge operate now in terms of ignorance? So he gives us an example of our surface consciousness, and there are four operations of within us through which we come to know of anything. So the first operation is where we know things by identity. How do I know a thing by identity? Its best example is we know that I am. You can't prove it, you know it. I am. By some kind of vague identity that you are. If somebody tells you, locate, give evidence, show me. So, but you know that you exist. So it is self-evident. It is a state of complete identity. And then there is a knowledge, form of knowledge, which is a direct knowledge, where you become something. Here it is being, you are. Then you can become something, and even though we don't know the roots, but yet we can understand, we can know. And the typical example is when anger enters us, we become angry. And what do I say? I am angry. Now this I am angry, how do I know? Because I have become. It's a direct contact. It's not based on I may be angry and nobody may get to know about it. So, but yet I am angry. Then the third way of knowledge is there is a direct contact, but there is some degree of separation. For instance, anger is passing through me and I observe that I am angry. It is again a direct contact. I know that I am angry. Don't push such a person. So, are you really angry? And then, he'll identify with it. So, there is a direct contact. I know that I am angry, but there is a little bit of separation. And this separation I can maintain to understand the phenomena in terms of its objective object, or I can identify with it. And again, there is the third type of knowledge may graduate into the second type. Now, this is easy with regard to certain vital movements, anger, lust, greed, fear, but very difficult with terms of thought. But here also, it's possible to know that I am thinking. So this is a kind of direct contact, but with a little bit of separation. Who knows that I am thinking, and we can follow the chain of thoughts. So thereby, this is direct contact, but with a kind of separation. And the fourth is a completely separative knowledge, and that is what is the knowledge of the world around us. And it's so separative because each thing is as if enclosed in a little box. And in that box, there are some windows cut out. Or let's say room, box is too claustrophobic. Okay, we are in little room. But nature has provided some windows because we have to also communicate with the world. And some kind of a oneness should be maintained in one way or the other. And these windows are the senses. So these senses, what do they tell us? They tell us about the appearance, the surface. I see a person seething, and I may derive this conclusion that the person is angry. And from there, I may infer, because my emotional mind may come in and say, the person is angry with me. And the person may end up saying that, no, I am not angry. I am just hungry. You see, children, so because my contact is totally, I am separated from the object. By the senses, we learn something about the appearances. But appearances are not knowledge, obviously, it's just a little surface. So then what is done is to these appearances we add our emotional mind. That's why they say it colors. So based on the appearance, I also draw the inference from my past data of it's like a rapid scan going on in the brain. You know, you have met people. Also, there are mindsets. There used to be at one point of time, I remember how racism used to, So there was long back on one of the railway stations, my parents saw there was an African around and they said, Habshi hai. Don't go near a Habshi. Habshi, basically, I asked them, what is Habshi? They said, no, they can eat man also. Cannibal. Now, it is true of a very remote part of Africa. They are beautiful people, very nice people. One of the finest people, very, the emotions are so nice. They are rooted to the ground. But that mindset is there. So the moment you go, your perception is colored. And based on all this, that's why people nowadays say that, one should not be racist and then don't judge people by their color and all these things. Because this is how we fail to know the reality behind a human being. And if this is true of human being, it is much more so of all else that is there in the world. So this knowledge is a separative knowledge. So based on that, we construct a whole universe, which is our own private world in which we live as its residents. But obviously this private world has little to do with reality. So we miss the real and live by appearances. That's why the mother at one place said, our science is a science of appearances. So when we see or hear about the virus, we believe it's just a virus attacking. But behind this kind of surface knowledge, there is a deeper subliminal. That's what Mother has spoken about, Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and we can see it in dreams. Sometimes the subliminal awakes because the hold of surface nature is much less. Or in yogis, by the development of consciousness, there may be a separation from the surface and other means of knowing can come. There could be a direct contact with the subject, penetrate it, envelop it, and we may come to know. That's how when Mother and Sri Aurobindo said that behind the virus there is a suggestion, there is ill will, and there is or rather an adverse formation and a suggestion of fear. So that comes, and based on that, and in addition there are collective suggestions. So what we see as a virus, there is a host of things behind which the subliminal can catch. And actually it is not difficult to understand, especially in the corona, people must have felt in those days that as this whole thing started, there was a kind of undercurrent of fear. It was so palpable, you could almost feel at your throat that there is something which is trying to choke you, because it was a suggestion, but one has to reject it. But this is a subliminal kind of knowledge. Then if this subliminal knowledge begins to grow in man, what we normally do is we discourage it. We say, no, this is not true. So we get glued to the surface. We fall back upon these means of knowledge. These means of knowledge derive from a truth, but they are exercised on the surface waking self, where the instruments are not there to truly exercise it. And so we constantly live with error. And if this subliminal begins to extend itself, then it can enter into the cosmic consciousness. And when it is in the cosmic consciousness, it envelops the whole cosmos and individuals and beings, and therefore a different kind of knowledge begins to emerge, a knowledge which is more or less like a direct contact, but with a little bit of separation if necessary. But this knowledge is the proper place where all this direct contact and knowledge by identity actually come from. But on the surface consciousness, it is misapplied. The powers are the same. And if we go beyond the cosmic consciousness, we enter into the spiritual consciousness, the true spiritual consciousness, the divine consciousness. How do we know there? We know there because everything is myself. So there is the one self, has become all these different becomings. So this is the only way to get to the real knowledge behind everything, is to ascend through these layers from the surface to the subliminal, through the subliminal into the cosmic, and from the cosmic to the divine self. Then one can truly know. Short of it, there will be always mixture of error. Even in the subliminal, there may be pouring in from the superconscient like flashes, but there is also a mixture from the subconscious. So in the subconscious, there lies every small little detail which we have observed is lying in the subconscious. It throws up and it interferes with our knowledge. Even when a human being changes, you will continue to believe the person is the same. Why? Because the subconscious impressions are like that. And sometimes people carry it, in childhood when people have had traumatic experiences, let's say with father or mother, they carry it as a kind of imprint. And they later on, any father figure, I have seen people who whose father was bearded and he had, was a bit violent. When they grew up, they had a dislike for anybody with a beard. Because, they had this subconscious imprint was there. And it was interfering with their knowledge that this person is a bad person just because the person has a beard. Equally, I have seen people who had a very, very difficult parenting with regard to their mother. And I have seen they find difficult even to connect to the Divine Mother. Because the word mother they associated with this. And then I have to remind them that, look here, if such was the case, then who can solve it but the one Divine Mother? So that's the way that if you had this experience, but they have agreed that, the word mother we don't like. Because they had a kind of experience with their own mothers. So this knowledge is a very mixed domain. We call it knowledge, but actually it is largely appearances. Even when it is not appearances, it is a terrible mixture. Even in the subliminal, we cannot be sure. In cosmic consciousness, we can be sure to an extent. But in cosmic consciousness, there is the cosmic spirit, which has both sides, cosmic truth and the cosmic ignorance as well. Because you see, the cosmic spirit uses both for our evolution. So if you identify with the cosmic ignorance, it may create a totally different view of things. See, that's why we see Ravana identifying with the cosmic ignorance. He was a very large, vital, he had entered into that kind. That's why he could trap and tap all these, by his tapasya, he could tap all these beings of the subtle world, but it was a cosmic ignorance. A knowledge gained which was useful only for the operations of ignorance. Somewhere deep within he knew that Rama is my Lord. But for Rama, Ravana was none else but his other self. So see the difference between the two, and therefore the dealings was very different. Then we have the boundaries of the ignorance, as we have seen that, from the surface we enter into the subliminal, and through the subliminal. Now why this problem comes in? There he describes that because separate ego individualities had to be formed. And this individuality serves the function of maintaining the individual or creating the individual on whose basis the evolution has to proceed. The one became the many. Of course, this becoming the many may have been in two ways. One was there would have been no involution, like the original central being and the divine. So we all would have been typal beings fixed forever. Each one would have been what we are meant to become through a long process of evolution. So this one, Sri Aurobindo doesn't at this point say why we plunged, except that there was a greater delight and an adventure for which we took this plunge. But the moment we take the plunge, we accept the conditions of ignorance and we have to evolve over a period of time. Now in this process of evolution, we have first of all the inconscient. So inconscient is again formless. It doesn't have boundaries. It is the shadow of the infinite above. But individualities, if they have to be created, they have to be created by setting boundaries. So what sets boundaries? Initially at the level of life, it is the life mind which sets boundaries. To affirm itself, to save itself, safeguard itself. And then the mind comes in and it creates still more hard boundaries. So these boundaries are essentially the ego boundaries. Behind it is the psychic and spiritual consciousness. But it is required first to establish life, to affirm itself. Later on, when the time is ready and the ego is ripe, it falls away because the psychic begins to emerge. Prematurely, if one drops it, one may enter back into the disintegrating state and the inconscient. So, this is how the boundaries are created, and because of that, there is a further problem in understanding between self and not self. This boundary creates the sense of this is me and this one is not self. And we can have several examples. We call it as our house, my house. Sometimes, even when we are guests to some place, so we think it is my place. But isn't it true that actually no place is your place? This has been typified by that typical Sufi story that a person came to see a master and he saw the master with very scant things. So he asked him that, he saw it with very few things. So he asked him that, why are you living with so few things? So he asked the man who had visited, why are you carrying so few things? Because he was also carrying very few things. He said, because I am a traveler. So the master said, I am also a traveler. I'm also a traveler. Of course, our yoga is different, but it's to say that this idea that this is mine, this is me, and to affirm it often against others who are not me and not mine, this creates very strong, rigid boundaries which further reinforce the ignorance. Already there is ignorance, it reinforces it. So where does it originate, this ignorance? So there are some very beautiful examples Sri Aurobindo gives, that how all the time ignorance and knowledge and that which is beyond the two is always connected. So obviously why this chapter is important, because very often people speak of the soul and the ignorance. That's it. You read any standard book of spirituality, it is in ignorance which is due to Prakriti, and you have to come out of ignorance. So what does it mean? Prakriti is ignorant, okay. But see, if you see the working of Prakriti, there is even within it an operation of knowledge. And leaving that aside, now if Prakriti is ignorance, where did it originate? Is its origin in the Absolute? If its origin is in the Absolute, that means there is Absolute himself has ignorance within him. But this is a contradiction of terms. So we have already talked about all that Maya, Vidyamayi and Avidyamayi Maya. But suffice to say at this point that Prakriti cannot be ignorant in its origin. So why does it become ignorant? That divine Shakti. So here we can take an example. A man is given a certain role to play. And he plays the role. Now when he plays the role, he has to become, let's say, Rama, or he has to become Ravana in that play. So for a moment he forgets. Now what is ignorance? He forgets that he is this person. And he brings that into his role. He assumes that role. So at that point of time he forgets that he is actually neither Rama nor Ravana. Yet the beauty is, even though he forgets, any actor, something of him is flowing into this character. Each character you give to each human being the same role, they'll play it differently. It is very interesting because that's why it is said that when you do the role of a villain and you do it with perfection, somebody who has been a hero, let's say, you say that, wow, this is something fantastic because, it is not in that person's nature and yet he has done it to perfection. So the next step is where one forgets even one's own full character and completely identifies for that moment with the character of Ravana, with the character of Rama. There are instances, one famous instance is our serial on Ramayana which had come. And this man said that my life changed after it. Same with the man who played Krishna for the Mahabharata serial previous, Nitish Bharadwaj. He said, my life changed. This Arun Govil, as far as I know, he couldn't do any other role after that. Same with the one who did Shiva Puran, Mahadeva Ke De Mahadev, because it's very difficult. You have identified with a character. So though he knows inside that he is not actually Shiva, he has neither the power nor anything of Shiva, and yet in all his life he started identifying so much with the character. And that's why it is said that, when you love the divine, when you love somebody, you begin to identify with that person and you can even forget yourself. That's why it's so important to know whom you love. So, yet at the same time, all the knowledge is there. You may have forgotten yourself, and yet any time this knowledge can awaken. There is the story of Shiva, not Shiva, Vishnu Bhagavan. Shiva also comes in this story. So there are six, six of his devotees. They are in some Naglok and they call him. They are bhaktas, And Vishnu Bhagwan is a god, so he has to respond to bhakti. He's not a rational, he's not like practical person. No, I can't leave my home. He actually leaves and goes there. And poor Lakshmi ji is very unhappy about this whole situation. And he's there and they are feeding him and making him. And he's, because Vishnu Bhagwan is forgotten. Now he has become an object of bhakti for them. So they know that he is Lord Vishnu, but Lord Vishnu has forgotten who he is. So finally Lakshmi ji goes and requests Shiva, and Shiva comes and Shiva challenges him. So when Shiva challenges him, then he first starts responding. So Shiva increases the heat. So the two end up in a fight. At one point, I think he becomes Rishabdev, that's the avatar. I might have forgotten. He finally ties him. Then he fully comes out as his Vishnu Sarup and takes the Sudarshan Chakra. He says, you can't do this to me. So then he does pranam and says, that was my purpose, to remind you. All the time he is Vishnu, all the time he can reclaim it, but he has forgotten and he becomes this. So this is the way we see the origin of ignorance. Without it, this fullness of knowledge could not have entered into the details of creation. It was impossible to enter into every detail, and it has to go there in the detail and not just create something. It has to maintain it. You see, there is a difference. So, creating details is easy. You go there and let's say you make a building or you make a small little thing. But now you have to maintain it. Maintaining means you have to either be there, present there, or in some way or the other, you have to find a way to constantly communicate. And over a period of time, then you become that, because that's how it is. You are someone, it's like a soldier on the duty. So he has to maintain a post for 1 year, 2 years. You ask a soldier about his family, don't go by all this movie and chitti. Yes, that's true. But if he lives in that kind of emotional state, he cannot be what he is there. So at that point of time, he identifies with that battalion as his family. So much so that if somebody, there is some hurt to a member in his battalion, that's the time he gets furious. Much more than he gets to know about, back home with people, and he really lives there. So you have to maintain. Now, how does this maintenance is possible? Only when the all consciousness creates a little vortex of energy. Let's say the body is a formation. So the same consciousness, which is the all consciousness acting in every body. But in each body, it must create a knot and fix it there and keep it fixed. If it just creates and says, okay, I've created human beings, fine, it will collapse the moment it withdraws. It's a formation, a knot. So, as long as form is not built, there is no problem. The moment you have a form, you have to maintain, because all forms are in their, at bottom, formations. They are maintained by a kind of energy vortex. That's why in human beings, it's that system of energy vortex is called Kundalini. What is Kundalini? The universal is entering and becoming this much. But all the time it is behind, but it has tied a knot and tied the jiva in front, and it has itself gone there and forgotten itself. If it starts undoing the knot, then it will disturb the balance. There will be no creation. So, the jiva has to stay there till it is ready, and step by step it is opening. There is a whole process. It ties the knot and enters into the, through the 101 knots. That's how one of the Upanishad describes. Nadi ek shatay cheka. The being is tied by 101 knots of nature. Now imagine if any of these knots say, oh, no, you are not that, I am not this, I am Shakti. What will happen to the jiva? Will collapse. But that's precisely what happens during death. So, due to attachment to the form, we are completely then tied to it further, and the ego reinforces it. Then Sri Aurobindo elaborates it, this exclusive concentration of consciousness force and the ignorance. So it is this exclusive concentration which is a temporary practical necessity. It is not cut off from the all consciousness. First of all, we must understand, every element of Prakriti is informed by the full all consciousness behind. There is infinite Shakti behind every atom of existence. And that's what is revealed to us in the story of the Kena Upanishad, where, and it has practical implication, where what does the eternal do? Picks up a blade of grass and asks the gods, Gods are working in creation to fix formations. They also create lovely formations. So he says, I am Agni, I can take everything. I am the origin. I have given birth to everything because Agni is the one who has creative fire. But where does its power come from? From the eternal. So the eternal says, take this blade of grass, and it cannot. Why you? I am the one who expands everything. Expand this. Make it fly. It cannot. So behind everything there is the all Shakti. Without it, even the gods are not capable. They don't have the power. So all power comes from the one. Now in the consciousness of the divine, it's a continuous flow. When you ask a person sitting in, who is the topmost person, let's say in the city, he's supposed to know everything. Which house, who is the maintenance engineer, he has all the list. And he will say, okay, we have to direct it there. He will give a hotline. He knows. But the man sitting there may not know. He just knows his immediate boss. So when we look at it from the divine perspective, ignorance is nothing else but a special action of the all conscious force. At any point of time, he can say, this engineer is not working well. You be out and replace. That is the power. I'm sorry, it's not only engineers, even doctors. It can say, you are not doing the job well, I wish, but there is a reason why even that is allowed, and we'll come to that in the next chapter. So, but the person out there thinks he's there by his own power, by his own energy, by his own will, and therefore he acts like that. He doesn't know the all consciousness. So this is the difference between somebody caught in the ignorance and somebody who is living in that consciousness, which is at once all knowledge, omniscience, and at once all power, omnipotent. So this idea that there is this ignorance in which the soul is trapped, soul cannot be in ignorance because soul is coming from the same eternal that we have already read, eternal and the individual. But the soul can enter into ignorance for the sake of the purpose which he'll reveal subsequently, for which it has gone there. And to be trapped in ignorance, there must be a strong ego formation around it. So that even when it is aware that I am not supposed to be this, I am not supposed to be here, the ego formation will say, no sir, we will not let you go. So there will be a war between the ego and the soul. Mara and Buddha, as it is said, Krishna and Kansa. Say, I will not let you go. It has taken millions of years to create this house. And the soul will say, I want to demolish. Demolition is not allowed also. You have to find the door through which you connect to the all consciousness. And that all consciousness will pour in and change this lower formation into the higher. That is the whole plan. So then Sri Aurobindo takes us to the origin and remedy of falsehood, error, wrong and evil. So is there any of these things in matter? Obviously not. The stone is neither wrong nor erroneous. It works fixed to its law. There is no possibility of falsehood in it. It's a limited thing. That's all we can say, that of the all consciousness, it's a very limited something. But can it be used for evil? Yes. You can pick up a stone and use it for evil. The stone itself is not evil. Or you can charge a stone with evil intent and use it. People are capable of doing it and they do it. So its origin is not in matter. Is falsehood there in the all blissful absolute? Again, that is an impossibility. So where does it come and why does it come? It is the result of the ignorance and its extreme result. That's how Sri Aurobindo puts it. The extreme result of avidya is evil and ignorance. How it becomes evil and ignorance? There is this separative life living on the surface, doesn't understand anything about anything, yet there is an impulse in it to affirm itself. This is given by nature. Otherwise there will be total chaos. Otherwise there will be complete destruction. And it has to affirm itself against a world. It feels it's against the world which it doesn't know. Against others whom it regards as not self. So what does this ego individuality do? It starts affirming itself, and the ego, because all behind there is this sense of the universal, it also has a tendency to universalize. But it starts doing it by stamping its ego on everybody. It wants, like you will see, typical example is when you will see in some of these rallies, you will see everybody wearing the same mukhota, mask. So what is it? That it is stamping itself on everyone. Everyone should become like that. So its extreme tendency is that if you don't follow my God, if you don't follow my religion, if you don't follow my way of life, not only follow, if you don't believe in it, we will exterminate you. So you see how is evil originating? It's originating in the vital and the mental world. It is not there in mind. It is not there in matter. It is not there in lower life forms. In lower life forms, nature has just given an energy which is enough for it to survive. In the lower life forms, in the plant and the animal life, there is suffering, pain, but not evil. Certainly not conscious evil. Now, this suffering and pain is given by nature. It's a blessing actually, because that is how it affirms itself. The moment there is something painful, the animal stays away from that. So it's a boon actually, it's a gift. Otherwise, again, you can't affirm life in ignorance. So animal is given this sense of suffering, and it doesn't understand the larger context of things. Some animals can. So it's two examples. We must have read that Androcles and the lion. So somebody saved the lion took away the thorn, and the lion was grateful. Please don't try this, because the instinct in the lion is to devour if you get near. Sometimes people don't understand, even with dogs they do it. So there is a way to handle dogs. Suddenly somebody goes and feels, oh, so nice. Now that dog's knowledge is based on sensations. Now, if you have either fear, or if you are not dog friendly or God loving, whatever, and you start puchkaroing a dog, the dog doesn't understand. It's not his fault. It may just suddenly grab your, hand or shirt, because it's not evil. It just wants to preserve itself. And the only mechanism it has is to react this way. So there is a limitation of knowledge and a limitation of will, both. Limitation of understanding and a limitation of action. So both these knowledge and will are very limited, and therefore there is pain and suffering possible at the vital level when these animals are animal creation. But with the coming of mind, something else gets in, which brings in evil. Because there is a formation of the ego. There is an ego formation in animals. There is a vital mind which does build a kind of structure around it. An animal does want to save itself. It's not ego in that sense, but it wants to safeguard itself. But with coming of the mind, it wants to safeguard not just its physical formation, but all its world of thoughts, dreams, hopes, everything. So there is desire and there is the ego, and they are the ones, because there is lack of knowledge, true knowledge, and because there is lack of power, true power, lack of response, therefore there is evil which can afflict all those who are around. So there is a wrong relation formed by the ego self with the world around, wrong action as a result of the wrong relation. So if this was all, it was still okay. But in the process of involution, in the process of creation, each world were created. Now each of these worlds are limited worlds. In these worlds, ignorance is operating. In the mental world, not the overmind, but as it starts coming down, the limitation starts coming in. Some kind of ignorance starts coming in. So you will see that even in some of these worlds of the gods, not the true gods, but the lesser gods, there is play of ego and something which can almost look like evil. They don't like, let's say, human being advancing. Why? Because my throne will be taken away. Because again we see that sense of separativeness, avidya, takes hold. And when we go into the vital world, there are actually creatures who not only want to expand their empire, they actually can be very hurtful. This is a whole occult side of creation which we don't know. And that was known to ancient occult mystics, and we can, understand, actually know them through the process of yoga. They are called as hostile forces, adverse forces. In ancient India, they were known as asuras, rakshasas, pishachas. So who were the asuras? Asuras were beings in the mental world. So again, they lived by completely separate ignorance, and they wanted to expand their empire. So they are the asuras. So they use their own instrument to expand an ideology. But because it doesn't take into consideration all other ideologies, that's why it is ignorance. It can be very dangerous to the entire world. So these are the asuras. So asuras at a human level are very intellectual people. They have studied in universities which teach, which strengthen the mental ego, and they are very intellectual people. But the hallmark is that they live for the sake of the ego. Heart is often cold, and there is tremendous passion and ambition in them. So intelligence intelligence is not the right word. Intelligence has beautiful meaning, but intellectual capacity plus passions or ambition, very little of heart, love, some love has to be there in creation. So that creates an asura. And then when you have, so they are very, people get very impressed by their knowledge, not realizing ki it's all here, not here. So this is their hallmark. And they want to basically expand their empire. So if you see typical asuras ways, they will catch you, they will try to, either forcibly give you knowledge, because that's what they know, or find ways and means to expand their empire of, amongst humanity. Then there are the Rakshasas. Rakshasas are on the vital world. They just devour the energies. They are like that. Asuras can be very deceptive because they can impress people. Rakshasas can't impress by their intellect, but they are brute forces. So they are again separative, completely in that state of ignorance, but they are there as part of the cosmic plan of beings. And below them are the Pishachas. Pishachas are actually sub-physical, sub-vital beings. What do? They literally suck your energy. So that's what they are. Not good people. And most of the time they are created by disembodied vital, when people die. And sometimes you'll see, that's why in olden times it used to be, if you go for cremation, come back and take a bath. Because these fellows are very active there. Bhutas, Pisachas. They're not dangerous otherwise. One should never be afraid of anything in this creation, because one carries the eternal Brahman within. But one should know what is what. So they are looking for some body, literally body, not somebody, where they can latch on. They are dead, but there is a period in which they are disembodied. So they are looking at if I get a body. So most of them will take on an animal body and exhaust their tendencies, or enter into the lower vital planes where they'll merge. But sometimes, if they find, especially in premature deaths, accidents, scenes of accidents, etc., so one has suddenly come out of the body, or in wars, bombings, and they're looking for bodies to really latch onto. So if they find a body, they latch onto, because they have to live. They want to live. But to live, they have to enter a form. And they latch on and they start sucking the energy of the form. So when they start sucking the energy of the form, one starts experiencing all kinds of disequilibrium. But the interesting part of these Rakshasa and Asura is they don't destroy easily. Because if they destroy the form, then... so that's why, but when they want to grow immense, then they start feeding on a mass scale. They start, using human beings as the instrument, start influencing them, even possess them, and such people become centers of a great destruction. But the problem is that when they become centers of a great destruction, they want to become immense by this process. But at a point of time, they collapse because they are not absolute. There is nothing like absolute evil. It neither exists, actually, it doesn't exist even in the inconscient. Unless we say that as consciousness emerges, the possibility is there. It doesn't exist even in the absolute. Unless we say that as it will take a plunge and go towards ignorance, there is a possibility. So to that extent, yes, but it doesn't exist at these two poles. They come in between. That's why one of the writings in the Vedas say you will find truth only at these two poles. At the spirit and matter. All in between is a mixed stuff. Mind, vital, they cannot be trusted. So this is how this evil is maintained. So there are instruments of these forces which feed upon us, which want to expand again affirm themselves. And if they catch hold of somebody who is terribly egoistic, then naturally they will want to expand their empire through such a person. Such a being was Hitler, such a being was Stalin, Mussolini, and their hallmark is that they just want to expand not just their territory, but to any extent they can go. It's not about any war, I must make that clear. But that urge in various ways the Asura wants to expand. It's not just about physically capturing a land, but in many ways it wants to expand and destroy other things. So this is the origin of evil. What is its remedy? Well, if the origin is when nature has taken a plunge into ignorance, when all consciousness has become its very opposite in a way. Because in human beings, this actor analogy, we can always step back and say, oh, I am this. But all consciousness has gone still deeper and deeper. And it has gone into inconscient, the last possible point where it maintains itself. And then it vanishes. Completely forgets itself. So because of this complete self-forgetfulness, but it's there and it will emerge through a long process of evolution. But it has gone into it and become its opposite. So consciousness becomes unconsciousness or inconscient. Delight becomes suffering, its very opposite, because it has forgotten itself. And yet within it, there is the delight. So it seeks some kind of joy, some way or the other, because it's delight which has become suffering. Truth becomes falsehood. So what does falsehood do? It falsifies all the values of everything. It makes us prone not only to error, but to actually diverts, distorts, perverts truth. It has to pick up truth only and then it will pervert it. There is nothing else. I mean, at its origin, it's truth. So it wants that, but through these means. And life became death. So this is how we see that the very opposites were created as the consciousness tended towards ignorance. And this ignorance, its extreme result became inconscient. And then in the process of emergence, there is a little bit of, as consciousness evolves, it cannot dissolve the form. So it has to evolve in a way that within every form, there has to be a balance between the consciousness and the form. So it cannot suddenly become all conscious. So step by step, until in human beings there is a possibility of joining the two poles of existence. The form and the formless, the all consciousness and the inconscient in human beings. So human beings are the field of this great struggle where the final evolutionary emergence has to take place. Now those who take this stand that it is all nature, is all ignorance, they say, why all this? Soul has awakened, let it go away. But that was not the intent of creation. If that was the case, there would have been no creation at all. It was not a puppet game that the divine is playing. So the intent is eventually that on the basis of form, the formless can manifest. And what a form! A form which you cannot just dissolve easily. It is subject to disintegration, but it gives the sense of concreteness. In no other world one can find that concreteness. So on this basis of form, this entire inconscient journey of evolution, the great game of games, the transformation of this ignorant nature in terms of the higher supernature. That is the game of games. So everything in this ignorant lower nature draws itself from that higher supernature. An actor who is acting and becoming Ravana, where is his strength and everything coming on? Coming from the same person who may be really like Rama in his real life. It is from the same. That's why when the Gita says, I am also the cunning of the clever. Ultimately it comes from there. So it has to reclaim that energy and transform it and turn it into equivalent, but without disrupting the form, rather transforming the form. So that is the challenge he will reveal to us in the next part 2, where he will speak about the spiritual evolution. So here we'll just read just a few passages. So in evil and ignorance, it's important to also to understand that often what we call as evil, see, because there is this all consciousness behind, often good comes out of evil. This very interesting phenomena. In one of the letters of Sri Aurobindo to Mrilalini Devi, when her brother, one more brother has died, Sri Aurobindo says, I can understand your pain, but we must trust God who often brings good out of evil. And we see in Sri Aurobindo's own life, the jail became a passage towards a greater freedom. So in this is how the world operates, because the all consciousness is always behind. At the same time, this all consciousness, because it has become all this, can anytime intervene and change the course of things. So there is nothing like an absolute evil in which we have to suffer. That's why a prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to transcendent force. Just as the divine has created outer means to tie us to this outer world, or rather nature has created, similarly there are inner means through which we can connect with the all consciousness. It's a special privilege of man. Though even the dumb, four-footed, their prayer is heard by the divine. So this what, and the second part is that often our idea of good and evil itself is very faulty. So when we live in the vital ego, we believe whatever is flatters my vital ego, whatever is pleasant to me is good. If something unpleasant happens to me, it is not good. Something which is painful is not good. This is how we look at it. At the same time, the mind, it also brings in its own set of values. Whatever affirms my ego is good. Whatever doesn't affirm my ego is evil. Not realizing that it may be just the other way around. So first of all, we must be clear that our very valuation of things is not right. Also, we must understand that when we are acting at a given point of time, this further leads to a complete forgetfulness of the self. Because we are aware of that moment, not of the whole past, which is anyways there within us, and not of the future which we are aspiring to be. But the all consciousness knows all the three coordinates. This is the difference. And that's why it supports it through the journey. So we are not aware of, we may have done things, they have hidden in the subconscious which will spring up. But we also have an aspiration towards a beautiful future. That's why the way out is to aspire, aspire, aspire. Ultimately, that strength is the one which will eventually act and break the bonds of the past. So, this is the logic behind all these spiritual practices. So, human values of good and evil, as of truth and error, are indeed uncertain and relative. What is held as truth in one place or time is held in another place or time to be error. What is regarded as good is elsewhere or in other times regarded as evil. So, there were people who believed truly that, all this wearing mask and all is not good. But they were in places and world over, no, he is becoming the subject of spreading the virus. So you see, it was because it's a partial knowledge. We find too that what we call evil results in good, what we call good results in evil. Duryodhana did a great good to Angaraj Khan. But this was the good which opened the door to evil. So we must understand that our values are not necessarily. But this untoward outcome of good producing evil is due to the confusion and mixture of knowledge and ignorance. Because there is knowledge, it brings good out of evil. And because there is ignorance operating, it can any time turn a good into evil direction. This is the tussle that is taking place all the time. And then, just as there are these forces of ignorance, Rakshasas, Asuras, Pishacha, let's not forget there are forces of light, of good. But often people think that this darkness versus that good. But the absolute good is something still beyond. In him, that these two are reconciled. It is not the fundamental truth of good and evil. It might be objected that physical evil such as pain and most bodily suffering is independent of knowledge and ignorance, of right and wrong consciousness, inherent in physical nature. But fundamentally, all pain and suffering are the result of an insufficient consciousness force in the surface being which makes it unable to deal rightly with self and nature, or unable to assimilate and to harmonize itself with the contacts of universal energy. So if we learn how to harmonize, that's why in supramental life the immunity will be spontaneous, because we learn the truth of everything. Anything which is adverse enters its zone will get transformed into its truth. So this will be the big difference. And then he speaks of these beings. It is true that as we pass from the mental to the spiritual, and that is a passage toward the absolute, a subtle wideness and an increasing intensity of light of power, of peace, of ecstasy mark our passing out of our limitations. But this is at first only a sign of freedom, of height, of universality, not yet of an inward absoluteness of self existence, which is the essence of the matter. So, even when we begin to evolve into some wideness, light, there is always this susceptibility of being pulled back by these forces. So, that's why Sri Aurobindo was not content with an overmind creation. He wanted the perfect consciousness where there is no possibility of error. To this absoluteness, pain and evil cannot attain. They are bound to limitation and they are derivative. If pain becomes immeasurable, it ends itself or ends that in which it manifests, or collapses into insensibility, or in rare circumstances, it may turn into an ecstasy of ananda. This is a real experience. If there is constant pain after some time, it becomes insensible, or it may even change into an ecstasy of ananda. So, this is how one can actually experience it, because there is a constant impinging of that vibration. It may change, though it is rare. That's what Sri Aurobindo was doing when he had, because of the action of the hostiles, where he had fallen and his leg was broken. And he said that I never imagined that, because it was the Second World War clouds. He said all his protection was with the mother. And these fellows will try to even enter here. But they entered. And then when he was lying, mother came, of course, immediately she came to know inwardly. And then people came and he was lying like a golden Purusha, Niruddha describes. And when he was asked while shifting the leg, the doctor asked him, is it paining? And Sri Aurobindo said, one can be above pain. And then he was asked that, what were you doing during that period? He was saying that I was transforming pain into ananda. He said earlier I had done it, but that was not pain of this intensity. So earlier was referring to the scorpion bite, which is there in one of his poem Meditations of Mandavya, where he converted it into delight. So here was an opportunity, and only the Lord can think like this, that okay, let me try this, because if I can infuse consciousness of ananda even in this intense pain, it opens a new possibility for earth and mankind. So then, because we see that there is this relativity of good and evil, some people say that basically it's all relative. There is nothing like good and evil. But this is not true, because as we grow in consciousness, there is a kind of awakening of an innate sense of good and evil. It is independent of the vital ego and the mental ego. And first it takes the form of a moral good and evil, a religious injunction or something from outside which human beings follow. But even that is not the ultimate truth. There is an ethical sense which begins to awaken, where something within us says it's not right. And that is the psychic, which alone knows what is good and evil in the true sense. And therefore psychic may accept things which may look like evil apparently. It may shun things which may look like good, because its discernment is of a different character. Its good is whatever leads it toward the divine, and evil is whatever holds it away from the divine. Mother said at one place that in a general way, you can say that whatever leads or tends towards unity, consciousness, light, peace, freedom, joy of being, fullness of being, comes from truth. Whatever leads to confusion, disorder, all these things like anger, fear, and all these movements, division, all that comes from evil and falsehood. So this is a general rule, and it's good to remember that. And also the action. When falsehood acts, it makes the being shrivel. It's like you throw smoke over a flower, and when truth acts, it makes it bloom. So one can experience it within. When there is a state which is wrong state, there is a kind of inner shriveling, twisting. Even the face can get distorted. Whereas when there is a beautiful inner state, there is a blossoming, there is a state of inner happiness, inner joy, inner peace, regardless of anything outward. The sensational values of good and evil are inherent in the form of pain and pleasure. But the mental idea, the moral repose of the mind to these values are a creation of the human being. It does not follow, as might be hastily inferred, that they are unrealities, mental constructions only, and that the only true way to receive the activities of nature is either a neutral indifference or an equal acceptance, or intellectually an admission of all that she may do as a divine or a natural law in which everything is impartially admissible. That is indeed one side of the truth. There is an infra rational truth of life and matter which is impartial and neutral. Nature is amoral and admits all things as facts of nature. But in human beings, because there is an evolution of consciousness, we cannot afford to remain completely neutral, indifferent to everything. We are not meant to be that. So, where does this originate? This sense of good. It originates from the psychic being in man. So, Sri Aurobindo gives us the solution at the end, and we will close with that. This then is the origin and nature of error, falsehood, wrong, and evil in the consciousness and will of the individual. A limited consciousness growing out of nescience is the source of error. A personal attachment to the limitation and the error born of it, the source of falsity. It's okay to be ignorant, but it is dangerous to be arrogant. So, if you are ignorant, fine, it's a process of evolution. But when we get attached to that kind of limited seeing and partial vision and believe it to be the truth, then we are opening doors not just to error but to falsehood. So there are three steps to come out of this process, and Sri Aurobindo gives this answer which he'll develop in the part 2 of the next book. All our human mental measures are not going to work out. They are necessary to prepare mankind. You may imprison the evildoers, these are required as a temporary contingency. You may give all kinds of moral lectures, religious injunctions. There are very tough religious injunctions, and in spite of that, very often, perhaps because of that, see, there are, in Indian thought, at least in Sanatan Dharma, the only evil is regarded as crookedness where one turns away from the truth. That's it. But if you go into some of the Semitic religions, there is such a strong, this is right and wrong, and you'll be punished, rotten in hell, or you'll be burning, roasted under fire, you have to kill by. And strangely, in these very religions, you will see the worst evils that have been committed. Because ultimately, that is not the root at all. It is not going to work. Even people start finding that as an excuse because that's how the mind plays. So that is not the remedy. Remedy is not another religion either. The remedy is to complete the spiritual curve of evolution. We have left that Adam and Eve's beautiful state where there was no evil and no good either. The primal innocence of creation. And we have eaten the fruit of the tree of knowledge. So we have to go through that curve of good and evil, choose consciously good, reject the evil, until finally we emerge into the plenary supramental illumination. So that process is, there are 3 steps. First is the discovery of the soul, not the outer soul of thought and emotion and desire, but the secret psychic entity, the divine element within us. Then we have the right guide, at least something which can tell us what really is good and what is evil. For instance, duty towards your family is regarded as good. On that basis, people judge Buddha. On that basis, people judge Sri Aurobindo. On that basis, people judge Sri Krishna. But not so the psychic entity. So this is the big difference, that the mental thought can never understand this difference. So the psychic element knows what should lead each one towards the truth of their being and becoming. So that is the thing we must hold. And it is not an imitative thing, because somebody has done this, therefore I must do this. In each one it will unfold differently. This is the first step of self-realization, to enthrone the soul, the divine psychic individual, in the place of the ego. As long as the ego is there, do what one may, there will be evil and falsehood. The next step is to become aware of the eternal self in us, unborn and one with the self of all beings. So, widen into that cosmic consciousness where we Do not see others as not self, but different becomings of the one self, which is a different thing altogether. This self realization liberates and universalizes. Even if our action still proceeds in the dynamics of the ignorance, it no longer binds or misleads because our inner being is seated in the light of self knowledge. And from there, naturally, things like forgiveness and all this compassion will come naturally flow because you know that the other person is bound to ignorance, but deep within in everyone, it is the divine self which dwells. The third step is to know the divine being who is at once our supreme transcendent self, the cosmic being, foundation of our universality, and the divinity within, of which our psychic being, the true evolving individual in our nature, is a portion, a spark, a flame, growing into the eternal fire, from which it was lit and of which it is the witness, ever living within us, and the conscious instrument of its light and power, and joy and beauty. Aware of the divine as the master of our being and action, we can learn to become channels of his Shakti, the divine Puja, and act according to her dictates or her rule of light and power within us. Why? Because that takes at once in a single sweep a total cognizance of everything, not only of us but of everyone, of everything in creation. Our action will not then be mastered by our vital impulse or governed by a mental standard. For she acts according to the permanent yet plastic truth of things. This permanent is not a rigid fixed. As we evolve, the guidance evolves. So, according to the permanent yet plastic truth of things, not that what is the permanent part, that we have to move towards the truth. So, but it's plastic in the sense that GPS constantly it keeps telling us if you have taken a detour, how to get back. You have taken a wrong turn, how to get back. So there is a plasticity in it. It doesn't say, oh, you didn't follow that road, now abandoned. So, but yet it knows where we must go. So the permanent and plastic truth of things. Our action, not that which the mind constructs. So mind can construct what is the higher truth, what should be done, not done, mind standards, but not according to that, but the higher, deeper, and subtler truth of each movement and circumstance as it is known to the supreme knowledge and demanded by the supreme will in the universe. So, this is the remedy to emerge out of the partial consciousness lit by the candle flares of the mind, to emerge out of the vital and mental ego which believes that this light is only my property and meant for me, this universe is only meant for me. So, we have to emerge out of that. And instead of that, replace this lower nature, ignorant nature, with the inrush of the divine Shakti. We should slowly invade and occupy all the fields where right now the lower nature with its ignorance is operating. And when this higher consciousness can occupy this field where lower nature is operating, completely change that field, then the form itself will change as a natural consequence. So this is the truth that Sri Aurobindo reveals to us. Rest he will reveal in the next part of book 2. So how to undertake this spiritual evolution? What are its steps? How does it take place within creation? Taking us to the grand culmination of the dream of the divine life.
Namaste, Alokda.
Namaste.
So, in traditional Kundalini Yoga and Raja Yoga, was there an understanding of the inmost being, the psychic center of consciousness behind the inner being, the subliminal being, and also because there has been a bias towards transcendence over transformation, was it given sufficient importance and the process understood in totality, or I don't know what? But and is that also the reason why? Unless we discover the psychic center, we would be open to all kinds of influences, and then the lower chakras opening first creates a lot of problems, including a lot of mental health issues that we see. Yeah.
Yes, quite so. So actually, an explicit, if we go into the traditional literature, claims apart, there is, people speak of soul, but nobody has spoken of soul as an evolutionary, formation which evolves and becomes a psychic being. It's not there. It's hinted in a couple of Upanishads, the Svetashvatar, the Katha Upanishad, some places here and there. But it's not definitely this thought, if you want to put it, has not developed fully. And I suppose it's because if we take the process of evolution of the soul towards the psychic being, takes quite a few lives. This is what Sri Aurobindo will reveal to us in the next part. So it's quite likely that the full development to the psychic being had not actually taken place on earth. So these yogas could not understand the real meaning of the mystery of God in the world and creation. What they called as the soul was the Jivatma, which somehow has got trapped into ignorance and has to free itself from that. So there was this reflection somewhere falling, because Jivatma has that central being which is always with the divine, and something of its ray was falling in the consciousness. But to catch it and find in it as the nodus through which the divine reacts with the world or meets the world, that was definitely missing. It's not there in Kundalini Yoga. Whatever I have read and even practiced to an extent, and it's quite true that because the Kundalini opens from below upward, it's there in that Pandit Gopinath Kaviraj, his book, he had an accidental awakening of Kundalini, and in fact, incidentally, he had written to Sri Aurobindo. There's a whole 2-3 letters exchange with him, and Sri Aurobindo said it's a very specialized process, and I don't undertake, but I can give you a guidance. He just gave him a general guidance, and then he said you have to be with somebody who deals with this kind of a situation, because when the lower chakras open, the individual which is knotted inside, the knot opens and you enter into the universal, which is both cosmic truth and cosmic ignorance. And the powers and forces of those planes are much more than, they are superhuman actually. So that he discusses elsewhere that there are two kinds of superhumanity. One is the godlike and the other is titan-like, Daivik and Asuric. In the Gita is very clearly, they are superhuman by human standards. But definitely it is not the line of evolution that man should take. So the entire effort was to take it further and further, because anyways, and it was to be done under the strict guidance of a guru. See this, it's Kundalini is a yoga which comes both in Tantra as well as in practices of Hatha Yoga originally. So you need that kind of thing. But in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, of course, centers have to be opened. If one has to enter into the cosmic being, there is no other way but opening the centers. But in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, it opens from above downwards. Of course, there is a way that from the mind you can take the soul beyond. Soul is involved in the mind. So the Gita doesn't speak of opening of the centers, because its purpose is very different, to make us a channel and center and instrument for God's work in the world. So it starts with soul is involved in the mind, meaning thereby it is identified with the mental body and mind, which takes up the vital and the physical. And from there it can find a door by which it can become Jivan Mukta, a liberated being. But a liberated being who becomes a Jivan Mukta and a channel for God's work in the world, until God bids him release and draws him back to himself. So this was the highest point that was touched ever, and that was the Gita. Otherwise it was always speaking of, eventually, a liberation from this field of nature. Another point which is very interesting here, since you raised it, you see, in knowledge, it's easier to attain a state of, by drawing back from action. In a state of passivity, one can attain to knowledge. But the problem is, the moment you act, there will be an exclusive concentration, which Sri Aurobindo has spoken of. So the traditional yogas felt that because action implies a kind of exclusive concentration, therefore action is not consistent with true knowledge. So their process was that somehow use action, minimize it, use only certain actions, ritualistic or those enforced by a religion, until you reach a point where you can cut the knot of action and enter into knowledge. Sri Aurobindo says this, again, because nature is ignorant. But Sri Aurobindo says in the Brahman, the immobility and the active consciousness, the passive and the dynamic, the nirgun and the sagun, they coexist, and which is so logical. I mean, if Brahman acts as he acts in this world, so does it mean that he ceases to be immobile? Or when he withdraws, so does it mean that he ceases to be operating? In the Brahman, the dynamic and passive side are coexistent. So because it is there in the Brahman, so because we are a portion of that who has entered into the earth nature, we too can embody both together. So that's why there is possibility. But otherwise, action implies a narrowing of consciousness. That's where the concentration process starts. Many people say that when we are doing something, we forget. But when we are sitting quietly, we can remember. And that's where, from there, this urge towards meditation, exclusive concentration in a reverse way started. But it's not necessary. If you take the line of the Gita, it's not necessary. The two states can coexist. And we take Sri Aurobindo, who develops upon the Gita to its ultimate possibility. Then, because everything has its origin in the divine, that's what the Krishna reveals. I am the eternal seed and womb of everything. Then it's possible to be completely connected with the source even while we are acting, which is how he closes it. But this for that, the psychic being must come to the forefront. Otherwise, if we start from the mind, like Raj Yoga primarily starts from the mind. So it takes the mind as a station, and through concentrations, through certain activities of the mind, replacing wrong tendencies by the right ones, which is a good thing. You can bring out this soul, which is again involved in the mind, towards higher and higher planes by the power of exclusive concentration, till finally you reach the absolute and merge with him. But then there is no idea of a cosmic consciousness, no idea of an individual becoming active in the world and becoming its instrument. And Kundalini Yoga, of course, tried to synthesize nature and the divine in an interesting way. It said that the steps of nature will ultimately climb to the doors of Shakti. So to that extent, one has to give credit that the Kundalini Yoga did try to synthesize, very bold attempt, that it is the same divine Shakti which is involved in matter. Ultimately, she who is, Dhumavati, will climb and become Tripur Sundari, Siddhidhatri. So this, to that extent, they took us to the doors of the Vidyamai Maya. But again, she will grant you release, which is an absurdity, because if she has become this, we can be with her, be informed with her, and return back, streaming into our mind and life and body. But this is something which only Sri Aurobindo says. Nowhere else we find this described. Perhaps it was not even envisaged, maybe partial glimpse here and there.
One more participant is asking that with regards to good and evil, what is the supposed good intention behind terrorism, rapes, and other such heinous crimes in the society? How do we see them as a part of divine Leela in the larger cosmos?
Oh, you see, it is a very interesting thing you have asked. If you look at the millennium, this millennium, it started with a bang. A bang in India with Kargil war, terrorism, a bang in USA with the Twin Tower. See how it changed the entire geopolitical equation within the world. See, it's very there is a possibility to evolve without evil. But it's a possibility which seems near impossible. Once we admit that the extreme ignorance has become this, as long as the mental ego supports it. So if you see the America before 2000, Kashmir struggle was freedom struggle. It was aligned with Pakistan until it got hit. By whom? By the very same people who was Taliban. It was a creation against Russia. So it was an evil which blasted upon itself. That's what we were reading. Evil continues to grow till it implodes. So in that sense, again, within India, what happened? The acts of terrorism. They have brought to surface a reality, a harsh reality which we are not willing to see. And unless we see things, existence straight in the face, we don't find a remedy. Before that, we are very good, we're all bonhomie, everything is good, all is good. This was the darkest kind of, I would say openly, the left liberal thought, which had actually created a veil of Asuric Maya over the human mind. All is good, everybody is nice, just shake hands, say hello, happy, good morning, and everything is fine. It was not fine. That evil had to be confronted. It's like a pus. And if a doctor says, no, I will not do surgery, I'll give you antibiotics, it'll become an antibioma. You have to operate it. But before operating, one has to recognize. So it was the action of the mental ego, gigantic mental egos and vital egos. You see, if we see the last few centuries, such egos which traveled all over the world to conquer it. Last 1,000 years, if you see the history of the world, it is an expansion of the vital and mental ego. But what it did in the process, The goodness that existed before that, both in India as well as in Europe, in Greece, and Macedonia and all other places, Egypt and all these regions. So it was remaining fixed at a certain level. The march of evil into civilization really broke that entire order, and it has created a ground for a new order to emerge. So its purpose, what does terrorism and this kind of wanton evil does? It breaks the old world order. And well, could we evolve from the old world to the new world in a beautiful way? Sri Aurobindo says, yes, it is possible. But then human consciousness, there is that little role that we have to play. It gets very attached to its limitations, gets very attached to the extreme forms of mental ego. And therefore, these catastrophes come to free us from its clutches so that a new order can be created. But now there is a hope in the sense, again, openly Sri Aurobindo is saying, because see, before Sri Aurobindo, nobody even envisaged this kind of transformation. But now there is a possibility that at least a certain number of individuals, if they can engage with the spiritual evolution, not abandoning earth, not abandoning creation, not abandoning life, and rushing into nirvana, but if they are ready and willing to go through that process of purification without the destructive evil, they will be shielded. And once that next evolution takes place, surely we would have entered into a safe zone and beautiful zone, because it doesn't matter if it is few. It's like when man came out of animal, it changed the entire animal world. Similarly, once these supramental beings, and before that spiritually evolved beings upon earth come in, they're already coming in. So it'll change the balance of the human and the other world. Their mere presence is going to change. So this has hastened. Evil hastens. It is like something which hastens the whole process. Something which is lying buried for centuries. It unearths it and asks us to confront and make our choices again. Choices which we never made, we took it for granted. So when it brings them out, we have to realign, remake the choices. And that's because it's the hour of God. Therefore, it has been allowed to upset all the old balance so that a new balance emerges. So that old balance upsetting is yada yada hi dharma siglani. So see, if Mahabharata wouldn't have taken place, everybody would have been very nice. Kaurava Pandavas would have remained nice brothers. But it would not have been a dharma raj. So it had to go to an extreme where eventually that whole civilization collapsed, and out of that a new civilization could emerge. That is the process at a large scale. Mega scale.
Thank you so much, sir, for clarifying our doubts. Now, with this, we have reached the end of today's lecture, and we will observe a minute of silence and then we can call it.